Hey everyone, this is Matt at the Patriot Party, and today we have a very special show. We are doing a live interview with Crom Carmichael. You guys and gals can expect a very interesting interview with Mr. Carmichael, the founder of Giants of Political Thought and host of From Our Generation podcast. Y'all can find Mr. Carmichael's links at the bottom of the description page for this podcast. Please check them out. Now let's give a very warm welcome to Crom Carmichael. Mr. Carmichael, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Matt, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, well, I'm 77. Uh,
Okay, and you're getting around good, obviously.
yeah, I'm in great health, actually. I take zero prescription drugs. And so that's a good thing.
Wow,
That's a really
that
good
is
thing.
real good.
Yeah, yeah. But, man, I graduated from Vanderbilt in 71. I went to
Okay.
work in the banking industry for about 5 or 6 years and then bought into a sporting goods company. And we were very fortunate in my partner at the time, who was looking for somebody to buy into his company so that he could be paired up with his son on a going forward basis. But he was very well known in the independent as an independent sporting goods dealer. And back in those days, there were a lot of mom and pop sporting goods stores. And so he was well known to the people at
Mm.
Converse athletic shoes. And Converse decided to go from a national distributor. Wilson Sporting Goods was their national distributor. And they decided to go with regionals. And that was a tremendous a business opportunity for us. And we distributed Converse back in the heyday. When we started distributing Converse, Converse had a 95% share of the basketball shoe market in the country. And so we had a wonderful 13-year run with Converse, great product, and we covered the from Tennessee all the way up the Midwest, all the way up through Michigan and on the east and Pennsylvania, and then we covered the Dakotas on the west. We had the whole Midwest, and it was a tremendous run. And then in the 80s, I started a company called the Giants of Political Thought, and that really came about from one weekend that I had in 1979. Because interest rates, and you're too young to remember this, and good for you for being too young to remember it. But in 1979, I was 31 years old. We had our Converse business, and everything that we did in that business, Matt, was in $4 million chunks. We
Okay.
had we had $4 million inventory. We had $4 million of shoes on order. We had $4 million of payable. We had $4 million of receivables, and we had $4 million of bank debt. And we were
Okay.
and we were paying 18% on the bank debt,
Oof.
which you'd say, "Whoa, that is high," and that's true. But because we had $4 million of inventory and $4 million on order, Converse, because of the inflation of 18%, they would raise the price of their shoes by 3 to 4% every 90 days. And so we got a boost in the value of our inventory of 3 to 4% every 90 days, plus the shoes on order, which we hadn't even gotten yet. So by the
Wow.
so by the time we got the shoes and put them in inventory, they generally were 10% higher in price than when we ordered them. So the increase of the price increases more than paid for that very, very high interest rate. But even then, Matt, I said, this is weird. This is not sustainable. And I saw a brochure about a conference in New Orleans. It had a very fancy name called the International Conference on Monetary Reform. And then there were all these. The brochure had all these names of people, and they said they would tell you what was going to happen, uh, what was going to happen to the economy in the future. And so they, excuse me, I'm sorry. And so I said, well, I think I'll go. And because I need experts to tell me what's going to happen in the future. And, um, and so the first speaker that got up said, we're going to have hyperinflation. Here's why, and here's what you should do. And I said, boy, that is a compelling argument. I better prepare. And then the next one said, we're going to have massive deflation. Here's why, and here's what you should do. And it was the opposite, obviously. What you should do is the opposite. And I said, well, that's a compelling argument. I better prepare. And then the third one got up and said, we're not going to have hyperinflation. We're not going to have massive deflation. We're going to have a return to the norm. Here's why, and here's what you should do. So at the end of the conference, I realized that I was profoundly ignorant. And I mean that in the truest sense of the word. I didn't think I was stupid, but I did know that I was ignorant. And that is because I'd heard three different scenarios of the future. Logic told me that one of those three was going to be more accurate than the other two, and I didn't have a clue which one that might be. And that's the definition of ignorance. And for me, it hit me, it hit me in 3 days. If it hadn't hit me all at once, I don't believe I would have become the student of economics that I then became. And when you become a student of economics, you begin to understand that economics is really nothing more or less than understanding human nature and how human beings will change what they do based on government policy changes or circumstances. And so that led me to saying, you know what, history can teach me a lot. So I went back and I looked at history going back 2 or 3, 400 years. Now you could go back farther than that, but at that period in time, that's how far back I went, and I tried to understand how economies developed and what caused them. What is the cause of economic prosperity? And so I looked at some of the old classics. Um, we've heard of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, but Adam Smith, that's actually not the name of the book. The name of the book is an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. And so he lays out what circumstances need to exist for nations to become more prosperous. And if you look at those things, then if those things don't exist, then nations will not become more prosperous. And so prosperity is a function of policy. And I heard some interesting sage say something the other day. I thought it was fascinating. He said, America innovates, Asia imitates, Europe regulates. And, and, and that's pretty interesting. So what I did was I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go check that out. And so I went and I looked at in the stock market. I said, what are the largest cap stocks in the United States? And of
Hmm.
course, they're they're the Teslas, they're the Apples, it's the Google, the Microsofts, all of those, Facebook or Meta, whatever, and
Hmm.
Nvidia. So those are the big market cap companies, and they're worth more than $3 trillion a piece. More than
Yeah,
three.
I think
And
Nvidia hit 4 trillion the other day, didn't it?
might have, but I'm just saying. And so then I went and looked at the European companies. I said, what are the biggest market cap European companies? And they're around 400 million. They're the biggest companies in Europe are worth 400 million. The biggest companies in Japan are worth 3 to 400 million. That's all. And the biggest companies in China aren't worth that much. And innovation, this is a key point. Innovation, true innovation, is what drives prosperity. Prosperity is reflected in the value of the equities of the societies in which those companies exist.
That's crazy. I've never actually researched the market values, but if I'm doing my math right, and I might be off a zero with trillion to billions, but that's like 10,000, 1/10,000 thousandths of a percent, right?
Yeah, well, it's 10 times. In other words, the biggest companies in the U.S., and there's not just one. There's like eight or
Well,
nine of them.
well,
They are
400 million would go to 4 billion at 10 times, and
well,
then
four.
4 billion to a trillion
No,
is a
I'm sorry.
thousand.
I may have misspoke. The biggest companies in Europe are 400 billion.
400 billion. Okay, 10 times. Okay, I was like, gosh dang,
Yeah,
1/10,000th of a
no, I'm
percent.
sorry. My bad. My bad. But what's so fascinating is it's global. The biggest companies in Japan, they're in the hundreds of billions, not trillions. The biggest companies in China, I'm not even sure the biggest company in China's market cap is even 100 billion. And so you ask yourself, okay, what is it that makes our equity markets, that makes our stocks so much more valuable, and what is it that makes a stock itself valuable? And if you really dig down into the roots of it, it's technology, it's innovation, it's being first to market in a very, very big market. So the iPhone, I mean, this little device right here that I have, back when we were in the sporting goods business, Matt, we had a room bigger than the room you're sitting in, full of computers that cost us $500,000 in those dollars. Back then, this thing will do 100 times what those computers would do. And they give it to me for free if I subscribe. It's
Oh, I know I got one for free.
I mean, it's breathtaking. Innovation is breathtaking. Now, I am not a creative person, but over the years, I have come to where I have great appreciation for creative people. Now, creative people often are not very good at building a business, which is why a lot of creative people need to have practical people working alongside them to make what they are creating to make it economically viable.
You know, it's funny you say that. I've actually been a serial entrepreneur for 25 years. My first brick and mortar business was my sophomore year in college. I'm behind the register doing work while I'm ringing up stuff.
Okay, well, good
So,
for you.
you,
Good for you. That's
absolutely,
great.
I love it. I absolutely love entrepreneurism. But the you know, you said a lot because you get we as CEOs, I always say, one, we solve problems all day. We got to, there's nothing but problems coming all day, and we got to connect the dots. And like you said, these creative people, these tech geniuses, a lot of times, that's what makes Elon Musk so much different, is they can't run the business. They're really good, but they don't have those people skills and those common sense skills. They're just off the charts with IQ, and they're super creative.
Yes. Now, Elon Musk, but in every one of his companies, every one of them, he does have a CEO, and that
Okay.
CEO is a tremendous executor of the plan. Now, he is a genius. There's no question. Elon Musk is he's a phenomenon that I can only just appreciate. His understanding, by the way, his entrepreneurial gifts do not translate very well to understanding the nature of politics. Um, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, that's not. I'm not. I'm just saying. God only gives you so many gifts. He doesn't give you all the gifts. And Elon Musk has been given the ability to see things that literally nobody else can see, and so he builds these tremendous companies. But in every case, he has a person who is the CEO of that company.
Okay, I want you to elaborate a little bit. You just said Elon Musk is, you know, his forte does not extend to politics. So, would you elaborate a little bit for us on that statement?
Yeah, sure. Be happy to. Let me go back. In fact, I'm going to bring in another person who is not like Elon Musk, but he did say something that when I heard him say it, it took my breath away. And
Okay.
I don't know if you saw Senator Tim Kaine when he said that 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 there is no such thing as God-given rights, that all rights come from government, and that anybody who believes that there are God-given rights believes in Sharia law. Now, this is what he said, and I'm
Okay.
sitting there saying, and Ted Cruz heard that and was taken aback, but Tim Cruz is not only a senator, he's the senator from Virginia. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was a Virginian. So let's review what the Declaration. And by the way, what I'm about to say is what makes America exceptional in
Okay.
the history of the world. Not necessarily better than, but different from every country in the history of the world. And that is our Declaration of Independence. It says we hold these truths to be self-evident. Now that phrase, self-evident, is key here because it doesn't mean I have to explain it. It's obvious for anybody who looks. So we hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, when John Locke wrote that similar phrase in two treatises of government, he said life, liberty, and property. And here's the thing, Matt, that makes us interesting, makes us different. Our Constitution is the first law that has ever been written where the Constitution requires that the government set up an entity to protect individual rights. I mean, intellectual property rights. So it started off with copyrights, but then it became patents. And that is so when you get to what makes America different from every other country, we part of our culture is if somebody has a novel idea that they can file for a patent, the government will give them a patent, and they have 21 years to commercialize and exploit that patent. And then after that, the patent goes away, and anybody who wants to can exploit that patent. I'll give you a good example, one that I'm that you're familiar with and I'm familiar with, and that is that Gillette many years ago patented the multi-blade razor. And 21 years after that patent expired, the Dollar Shave Club and Harry's Shave Club entered the market. And they underpriced Gillette's multi-blade razor because the patent had expired. So please go ahead.
No. You go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you. You're on a roll. I'll come back in. I made a note.
Okay, but these things are. This is what makes so Apple. When Apple started, Steve Jobs filed a bunch of patents, and he had a choice to make. He could have licensed the Apple operating system to other manufacturers of laptop computers. He chose not to. And in choosing not to, he then it then opened a market for Bill Gates and Paul Allen to build Microsoft. And Microsoft's operating system was licensed. They didn't make laptops, they made an operating system. And their operating system was licensed to. It didn't violate Apple's patents. Apple's patents, many of their patents ran to the technology that they put in their computer, as well as some of the trade secrets in their operating system. But if Steve Jobs had made the decision to license the operating system to anybody who wanted to make computers, I don't know if Microsoft would have ever gotten off the ground. But that was a choice he made. Bill Gates saw that opening in Paul Allen, and then Microsoft. The history of Microsoft is clear. Now, what's interesting about Apple is that walled garden approach almost drove Apple into bankruptcy. And if you may know that Steve Jobs was fired as the CEO of Apple, and they brought in the fellow, and I don't remember his name, but he was the CEO of Pepsi. They brought him in, and he didn't appreciate the nature of technology and the business model that was inherent, or that was possible in all of Apple's technology. And they had a whole bunch of technology that hadn't come to market yet. And so they brought Steve Jobs back in. But when Steve Jobs came back into the company, I believe, and I don't know that there's a book on this per se, but I believe that the agreement was that Tim Cook would make the business decisions of the company, and that Steve Jobs would be the visionary on the technology. Because when Tim Cook started making the business decisions, Apple opened their technology. And so, for example, what makes Apple valuable today, I mean, as valuable as it is today, is the App Store on the cell phones is open to anybody who wants to make an app that is compliant with the Apple cell phone. But Apple gets a percentage of the revenue of everything that's done. Mm-hmm. And so they made a conscious decision. The same thing with music. So they don't, not all of the, I mean, they play anybody's music when they came up with their first technology for the music space. And so the Apple business model changed from being a walled garden to being one where it was open to anybody to make things on their dime that would then play on Apple's technology, but Apple would always get a share of the revenue. And that took Apple from, at that time, Apple had a $9 billion market cap, $9 billion. It's now 300 times that, 300 times.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I got a question. I want to rewind just a little bit. You were talking about the Virginia politician. What was his name? Tim Kaine?
Yeah, he was actually Hillary Clinton's running mate. He ran for vice president.
Uh,
And
uh,
please go ahead.
no, 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 no. Go ahead. Go ahead. I apologize.
No, no, he ran for vice president, and he was interviewing Nigel Farage, who is head of the Reform Party, who was testifying before I don't know what committee it was in the Senate, but Tim Kaine actually looked at him and he said, if you think that free speech comes from God rather than a privilege that is granted by government, then I have serious concerns because there are no such thing as God-given rights. All rights come from government.
Okay,
And
I want to do a little bit. Well, it's not really a rebuttal. It's a question I'm going to ask you.
sure, sure,
Do you think that, because I'm glad you said privilege, because one of the big things was First Amendment, freedom of speech is a privilege. A lot of people came out and said that right, before the election last year, um, or this year, but last year the campaigning. Um, do you think that there's a difference in the frame of mind of a politician, a present day politician, versus the forefathers who came up with the Constitution? Do you think the forefathers intended it as God given rights and fundamental freedoms? And the fact that the government is so oversized and bloated now gives them the, what's the word I'm looking for? It almost seems, and I know this is not the right word that I'm looking for, it's on the tip of my tongue, but it almost seems a little arrogant for a modern day politician to say, oh, this is not a God given right. But the forefathers, I believe, believed it was a God given right and didn't believe in this huge government. Do you think it's a difference in this day and age versus that day and age?
Matt, that is a great question. I'm going to unpack it in two or three
Okay.
different ways because because the founding fathers, um, the Common Sense by Thomas Paine and the Declaration of Independence do
Mm-hmm.
the best job of any two documents combined to lay out what the Revolutionary War was fought, what the principles were and the values were. Now, it's also interesting, and I'm taking a slight deviation, a detour here.
Okay.
George Washington was asked if he fought the Revolutionary War for the Constitution. He said no. He said, I fought the Revolutionary War so that we would be free from England. And he said, what would happen after that was not what was in my head at the time we were fighting for our independence. But then after the Revolutionary War ended, the 13 colonies drafted the Articles of Confederation. And it took about 90 days to draft the Articles of Confederation. It took 2 years to get the Articles of Confederation confirmed by 13 new states. They lasted 5 years, and at the time they were confirmed by all the states, ratified by the states. They thought that this would last for indefinitely, but after 5 years, the founding fathers, the people who ran each of these states, 13 states, they realized that the Articles of Confederation were insufficient for there to be a united country because the Articles of Confederation gave almost no power to the national government, almost none. And it gave the states, one of the things the states could do was print money. And so that created 13 different entities that could create their own inflation. It also, they could set up their own tariffs, they could set up their own trade policy, and it was within 5 years they were at each other's throats. And so they came to Philadelphia, and they thought that they were coming to amend the Articles of Confederation. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, when they came, they wanted to do away with the Articles of Confederation and draft a new document, which became the U.S. Constitution. And what they tried to do, what they wanted to do was empower the national government to some extent, but also to limit the powers of the national government. And so that the states, and by the way, the only the federal government, the national government, was the only government that was allowed to print money. No one else could coin money. No state could coin money. They could borrow, but they couldn't coin money. And they also, you also had the Commerce Clause. You had all these other things that addressed the one thing that the Constitution couldn't address. And I'd be happy to do another podcast with you on this subject, and that is that there was one fatal flaw in the Constitution. And that was that slavery remained as an institution under the Constitution of the United States. And so people say, well, therefore the Constitution was a terrible document. And my response is the Constitution was a great document with one fatal, terrible flaw. And we know that there was a terrible flaw because we had a civil war fighting over the.
Yeah, but I'd like to take a second
Sure.
and just go over a few things with you and kind of get your take on it. So the Patriot Party movement, which this is just the podcast part, and we obviously do a Saturday morning show to catch everybody up on everything that's happened. It's entertainment news, political news, culture, all that. And it catches everybody up on everything. But the Patriot Party movement is basically a grassroots movement, and the mission statement is truth and Constitution above all, because truth matters. We want to hold the media to a higher standard, and we want to hold our politicians to a higher standard because we've gotten so far away from the Constitution. So my rebuttal to the whole thing, because I get the same thing, people in the, well, what that means you're pro-slavery or whatever. And I'm like, no, there's 27 amendments, and those amendments, once they're ratified, are part of the Constitution.
Absolutely.
Therefore, we have something called uh, the Triple P, the Patriot Party Principles. And what that is the Bill of Rights, the 17 amendments after the Bill of Rights, that follow the Bill of Rights, that have to do with government structure, voting rights, civil liberties. And we have some constitutional doctrine like void by vagueness and all that. And it kind of lays it out where the average American should be able to read these laws and understand them. And, my problem is that everybody wants to challenge. One of the problems is that everybody wants to challenge these laws, and these laws are written so ambiguously that these judges are, well, I think Congress meant, well, I don't know, want to know what a judge thinks, because to me that makes it unconstitutional. Because if you think, then we sure as heck don't know. So these laws that have been put out so ambiguously, tens, hundreds of thousands, however many acts, policies, laws, they either need to be amended or repealed. And we need one administration to go in and set the bar high and say, you know what? We are going to do everything humanly possible this administration does not put out any policies or legislation that does not uphold the Constitution, and we're going to do everything we can to put the truth out. And if that administration sets that bar, then it's going to be high and hard for Democrats or Republicans to come in and say, well, we're going to lower it back down and start questioning everything. Because right now, you got last administration pushed the First and Second Amendment. You got this administration pushing Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Eighth Amendment violation. And so everybody's like pushing it to see how far we can push it, and it muddies it down and it erodes the Constitution. And then in 50 or 100 years, we don't have a Constitution. And I just feel like we would unclog the courts if we just started trying to go by those 27 amendments and a few doctrines.
Well, Matt, you've hit on something that is so important, and so I want to go. Let's go back in history just a little bit.
Okay.
In 1923, Calvin Coolidge gave a speech to a large group of employees from the Prudential Insurance Company. And the reason that the speech matters is in that speech, he pointed out that 70% of Americans owned annuities. So Americans were already saving for their own retirement. This is before Social Security. So they were saving for their own. But during that speech, he pointed out the total federal spending in 1923 was $2.3 billion. And that 2/3 of that was for defense spending, which means that $800 million, 800 million, this gets into your zeros. 800 million was all the money that was spent on domestic policies of any kind, and it's 10,000 times that now, almost 10,000, 8,000 times that now. And so what happened is that in the 30s, when Roosevelt became president, he threatened to pack the court unless the Supreme Court would rule that his policies were constitutional. And that is what gave rise to the alphabet agencies. And there's the term, it's a little expression, and it's called a switch in time saved the nine. And so he had been losing court cases 5-4, 6-3, and he threatened to pack the court. And the court, in order to keep the court at 9, they switched and said Social Security is constitutional. They said all kinds of things that previously had not been constitutional became constitutional. And man, I kind of like to think of public policy as there's two ways of thinking about it. One is paradigms, which are very, very difficult to reverse, and one is policies, which when you have a new administration and a new party in power, they can reverse policies very easily. It's very hard to reduce a paradigm. So Social Security, for example, was passed in the 30s. It now is part of our social fabric. You're not going to change. You literally cannot change Social Security. Now, Medicare, on the other hand, is something that is part of the healthcare system. It's not. It's something that people, when they reach a certain age, they get the benefits. I'm a Medicare beneficiary, but before I was a Medicare beneficiary, I negotiated much of my own healthcare costs. And Matt, what's interesting is this: of all of the government programs and all of the things that the government is involved in that costs us incredible amounts of money that shouldn't be spent, it's waste. It would be our healthcare system in the aggregate. We spend $5 trillion on healthcare, $5 trillion. Now that includes everything. That includes the amount of money that goes to providers. That includes the amount of money that goes to the third-party payment system. And I believe that the third-party payment system represents about 60% of that cost, maybe 55%. And let me just tell you a couple of very quick stories. When my wife, this is 40 years ago, my wife was going to have a bunion taken off of her foot. And she wanted to have it taken off at the beginning of January. And so we arranged with the doctor to have it taken off at on either the 2nd or 3rd of January, because she wanted to have 2 or 3 months of winter for her foot to recover, because it takes a while to recover from a bunionectomy. And so that was going to be the first healthcare expense I had in that calendar year, which began the annual deductible. And my annual deductible through what was called a medical savings account was $3,000. And I asked the doctor, I said, how much are you going to get paid by the insurance company for this procedure? And he said, I will get $1,500. And I didn't think much about whether that was high or low at the time. But what I said was, okay, that means there's $1,500 left that is going to come out of my share of the HSA or the MSA, excuse me. And so I said, give me 5 places where you take off bunions. And he did. I called each of the 5. And I said, I told him who my insurance company was. And I said, how much money will you, what's your price? And one of them said 4,200. That was the low end. And the highest end was 6,000. And then I asked one at 4,200, I said, well, what if I just paid you by credit card, day of service? And they said, well, it'd still be 4,200 because you told me you have insurance. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? Because I told you that I have insurance. They said, well, our contract with our insurance companies do not allow us to give a cash price if the patient has told us they have insurance. I said, wow, that's really interesting. I said, okay, well, let me think about it. So I waited 10 days and I called him back. And I said, I don't have insurance for this. It wasn't exactly true, but I had a $1,500 deductible that was still going to come out of my pocket. So that part wasn't insured. I said, I don't have insurance, but I will pay with a credit card, day of service. Do you have a price for a full payment in full? And she said, yes, our payment in full price is $1,556. And so I go in, I put down my credit card, they charge it. And then I said, may I have the receipt? And I said, would you please mark that paid? And so I took it and I bundled it all up and stuck it in an envelope and sent it to my insurance company, asking them to apply the 1556 against my deductible. And they sent me a letter. They sent me a letter back about 3 weeks later and said, you didn't go through our PPO. We're not going to apply this against your deductible. After calling the insurance company and being told that nothing was going to change, I went back to the facility and I said, you're going to have to run this through insurance. And she said, well, it's going to have to be $4,200 if I run it through insurance. I said, you just do whatever you have to. So then I get the EOB, the explanation of benefits. And it showed that the insurance company was going to pay the provider $3,700. Now, remember, this provider had just charged me $1,556, but they were going to get paid $3,700. And so then they subtracted the $1,500 that was left and cut them a check for $2,200. The lady called me and said, what do I do with this check? I show that you paid in full. I said, well, I'll be right over. And so I drove over and she endorsed the check over to me. And I said, look, I now know all the numbers. I said, why did you bid 1556 when you knew you were going to get 3,700? She said, oh, that's easy. She goes over and opens the door. There's 7 or 8 people in there. She said, these are the people that I have to put on my payroll to collect my money from the insurance companies. When you came in, you gave me your credit card. I processed it myself in 10 seconds, and I had the money in my bank account the next day. She said, Mr. Carmichael, we made a very fair price on your wife's bunionectomy. So, Matt, ever since then, I've negotiated my own outpatient surgery, and I have found that my negotiated pay in full price is somewhere between a low of 60% below to as much as 75%. And remember, I was still paying an insurance premium that was very, very high for the insurance company to negotiate a ridiculously high price. That's how messed up the system is. And so then I started looking, I said, okay, because this is I think you and I probably are very much the same in that we see something, we go, now that doesn't make sense. I think I need to try to understand how it got that way. So I went back and I looked at how our insurance system got the way that it is. And the answer is this, it's fascinating. At the end of World War II, toward the end of World War II, Roosevelt had put in wage and price controls. And business people went to Roosevelt toward the end of World War II before he died and said, Mr. President, we're making a lot of money. If you want to keep price controls in, that's okay. But would you please take off the wage controls so that we can pay our employees more money? And Roosevelt said, no, I will not let you pay your employees more money, but I will let you pay for their health insurance. That was the beginning of the third-party payment system, where employers could pay for the insurance and deduct the cost, and employees would get then a benefit, an after-tax benefit. Now remember, at the end of World War II, the top marginal tax rate was 94%. That's the top marginal tax rate at the end of World War II. The average person hit the 50% tax bracket between the middle and the slightly higher than middle income. And so getting their insurance paid for by their employer was a big benefit, because now they weren't having to pay for it out of their own pocket. And the employer was also in the high tax bracket. And so the employer could deduct the cost of providing the insurance, but was not allowed to give a pay raise. And so then in the 50s, private sector unions added first dollar coverage to all of their union contracts, because it made economic sense to have the company pay for the insurance if the company could deduct it, and it became a non-taxable benefit to the employee. And then in the 60s, you had Medicare and you had Medicare and Medicaid passed. And so now older people now were covered by the third-party payment system, and lower income people were covered by the third-party payment system. JFK signed an executive order in 1961 allowing government employees to unionize. Up until that time, government employees could not unionize. And if there's a single thing that I could change, Matt, if there's one thing that I could change, it is I would eliminate government employee unions as a statute. And the reason for that is that government employees pay the most important factor determining what a government employee makes is how many employees work under them. So it's kind of like a Ponzi scheme. If I work for you, then it's in your interest to get more people working for me, because then more people are now working for me, so I make more money, and more people are working for you, so you make more money. And so government employee unions' primary objective is to grow government as much as they possibly can, which also increases the power of government over non-government employees. And so
And
that's
taxes.
yeah, and taxes to pay for it, and regulations to give the government employees something to do. They have to justify their existence, so they pass a bunch of regulations so they have something to do, and then the private sector has to spend a bunch of money complying with the regulations. And so we've kind of gotten off track here a little bit, but starting in the 30s under Roosevelt, that's when the genie came out of the bottle, and the federal government's powers became bigger and bigger and bigger. And so your organization is fighting against that, and I applaud you for doing it. And
Thank you, sir.
because if you go back to what we originally started talking about, and that is the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, and why our country, why the United States is the wealthiest country on earth, it's because we have people have the right to innovate.
I've got a question for you real quick.
Sure.
Before you get too far off topic, it's
Yep.
just something that kind of popped up in my thought, because I my soon to be wife, she's been in the healthcare industry. Thank you, sir. She's
Yeah.
been in the healthcare industry for over 20 years. She's getting ready to graduate with her nurse practitioner's license, and I think she's got a job offer to work as a orthopedic NP in the clinic. But my question is, what really, we talk about insurance all the time, and I mean, doctors really don't like insurance because
No,
they say it's people practicing medicine without a license,
exactly.
telling what you can take, what's formulary, what's not formulary. Doctors can no longer prescribe what they think is the best treatment. But my question, because you brought up an interesting point, as you say that even to this day you find out the numbers, and you go in and you find out what cash prices are. They're 60 to 75% off. I'm a little surprised, and maybe you can kind of outline this for us. But I'm surprised they let you with Obamacare. It seems like doesn't everybody have to have insurance now? And the fact that they're quoting cash prices, isn't that kind of like contradictory to the whole Obamacare thing?
You don't have to. You can still say I don't have insurance for something.
Okay.
Well, let me take that back. I'm 77. The
Okay.
last time I did this, I was 64, and I'll tell you what that story was because it's interesting. I had had 3 colonoscomies. My first colonoscopy was when I was 52. My second one was when I was 58, and my next one and last one, paid for by myself, was at age 64. At age 52, my proctologist's name was Dr. McGrew. And I said, Dr. McGrew, I don't have insurance for this. How much can I pay you? Can I pay you in full day of service? And he said, yes. He said, you pay me $1,200 and I'll pay for the anesthesiologist. And I'm going to do it at a different facility than I normally do it. Okay. So I go in $1,200. 6 years later, Dr. McGrew, I need my next colonoscopy. He said, it's $1,200. Price had not changed. He said, you cut me a check, I'll pay the anesthesiologist, and we'll do it in the same facility as last time. Age 64, $1,200. So it had gone 12 years and he hadn't changed the price. Okay. Now that was in October of when I was 64 years old. My son, my wife's brother, died of colon cancer in his 40s.
I'm sorry to hear
And
that. My grandmother died of colon cancer.
yeah, and so he had died of colon cancer, and colon cancer is something that if you detect it early enough, you can, there's no reason to die of colon cancer if you know you have colon cancer early enough. And so my son, who obviously is in the family with my brother-in-law who had died of colon cancer, he was coming home from college and he was 21 years old, and he just mentioned the last time he took a poop, there was some blood. Well, I called my proctologist and I said, look, I said, normally I wouldn't be concerned about this, but his uncle died of colon cancer in his 40s. Should he have a colonoscopy to just take that risk off the table? He said, given the family history, the answer is yes. And I said, okay, well, we're going to run it through his college insurance. So we did. I get the EOB. The EOB showed the price. Now, this is the same doctor, did the same procedure, 2 months apart. Mine was $1,200. The EOB said it was $11,000, negotiated down to $6,600. So Dr. McGrew, the anesthesiologist, and the facility got $6,600, but they were willing to take $1,200 if I paid it in full 60 days earlier. So let me say this. Anytime I describe a problem, I always like to give a solution. And what we have now is there's 60 to 80 million people. Do you, by the way, have an HSA?
Uh, Actually, I'm in the process of transitioning over to my no, I don't.
Right, because you're going to transition over to your wife's policy.
Yes.
Does her employer offer an HSA? And
Now
if
that's the savings, right?
that's where money is put into a health savings account, and then, for example, and then it's your money. And if you go a whole year, for example, and don't spend a penny, that money rolls over and stays in your account. And so if say
Yes.
if $4,000 is put in there a year and you never spend it, then that $4,000 becomes 8,000, becomes 12,000. It then starts getting investment returns. And so for a lot of people, it can become a retirement account if they live a healthy life. And if they're young like you, that's a really great thing. So you ought to ask your fiance if their health plan includes an HSA. But here's the problem that we want to solve.
Okay.
If your wife has an HSA plan that's attached to an insurance company, the insurance company still negotiates the reimbursement price with the provider. So in the examples that I've given you, even though the money is paid out of an HSA, the price that is paid out of the HSA is a highly inflated price from what it would be that if you could pay it directly by debit card.
She
Out,
had the HSA. She
yep.
had that because that was the low bracket. But she just this past year there was the better insurance. It's like a $5-10 copay for prescriptions, a way lower deductible. Like instead of 3,000, 1,000 or something. She souped up the insurance.
Okay, well then the her employer must be paying a good bit of the insurance premium. And
Yes,
so otherwise, to get great benefits, the premium is very high. To the
ridiculous.
and yeah, and so what I'm saying is, so the solution to this is twofold. One is to expand HSAs even farther, and then to require all providers. And by the way, providers would like this. They would like to be forced to do this. All providers would make a cash price to be deducted from the HSA to make that cash price public, to give a cash price. Now, the insurance companies will fight that like a tiger. They will fight that like a tiger because
And they got the lobbyist.
they have lobbyists and they give a lot of money. And,
Hmm.
and big pharma will fight
Hmm.
that like a tiger because of the way that pharmaceuticals are paid for. And so you have some interest that will be fighting it, that are very, very powerful interests. But organizations like yours, um, ultimately the president, whoever the president is, and I hope it's Donald Trump, while he's president, will sit down with these people and say, look, I'm not trying to do away with insurance companies, but I am saying that insurance companies ought to be like car insurance companies. A car insurance company covers a car wreck. A car insurance company doesn't cover the cost of buying gasoline. It doesn't cover the cost of buying tires. It doesn't cover the cost of replacing a transmission. It doesn't even cover the cost of buying the car. It only recover. It only
That's why
covers.
they could cap it, right?
Yeah, yes, and so consequently, if insurance companies covered catastrophic and HSAs paid for the day to day and the outpatient surgery, and I put an outpatient surgery uh, 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 procedure. I would say that would be similar to a transmission, the cost of a transmission, because an outpatient surgery procedure, by definition, you're not staying overnight. And so you're
Let
in, you have it done, and you're out. Please go ahead.
Well, no, I just what you said kind of but we were talking about lobbyists and stuff, and that's what makes. And I don't know if he's going to go through with it. I know he started the paperwork, but I know there's a lot. It's very complicated. But this is what makes this so fascinating. Elon Musk. I know you said that it doesn't extend to politics, but his whole American Party idea to have all grassroots where you can't do the super PACs. I feel like the super PACs are what allows big pharma, insurance agencies, military industrial complex, all these huge corporations that I think really pull the strings because I think it allows them to get politicians in their back pocket. And if you did away with that, I mean, look at Kamala. She comes up with $1.5 billion in a month talking about his grassroots, and we all know that's not true.
Okay.
But
All right. Now this is a great topic, and I love the way you circle back to Elon. And when because I made the comment early on, he's a genius when it comes to technology, but he doesn't understand politics. And so what I'm saying is, when he said, "I'm going to start a third party," well, in order for his third party to be effective, and that all that matters is whether or not you're effective or not. To be effective, he would actually have to win political contests. It isn't that he would get 25% of the vote and somebody else would then win. He would have to, his party would have to win congressional and Senate seats. And I don't believe, now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or we could go back and do the research. I don't believe that Ross Perot's party ever won a Senate seat. And if it won a House seat, it would have only been one or two, which would have made it incredibly ineffective as a governing entity.
But my rebuttal to that would be that, right now we got tariffs and we don't know if it's going to work out. You got economists that say it will, you got economists that say it won't. So we're looking 5, 10 years down the road. If it takes 25 years to root out corruption and grow roots for a grassroots party, then hey, it's worth it to me. Are you still there?
I am, but you said if it you said 25 years in the grassroots party, and then you kind of
Yeah, what I was saying was that if I don't know what's going on. I think that my software will clean it up, but there's a little delay in our connection.
okay.
This high tech stuff. I do the best I can with it. I'm a pencil and papers guy, pencil and paper guy. But no, what I was saying is, all right. So we got tariffs that we don't know if they're going to work out. We don't know if they're not. We're looking 5, 10 years. It may be beneficial. If this takes 25 or 30 years to root out corruption out of politics and a grassroots movement grow roots, then it's worth it to me.
Well, here's kind of Ross Perot ran for president in 1992.
I
Uh,
remember.
I think he got like 17, 18% of the vote. He then kept his party going himself with his own money, and then I don't remember what happened in '96, but
Did,
it stayed for two more election cycles because Pat Buchanan won their nomination in 2000 over the objection of Ross Perot, by the way, and
yeah, but I mean, let's look at the figurehead for that. This
yeah,
guy runs for president, and if I remember right now, I was still a kid, but if I remember right, he withdrew because his family got threatened, his daughter or something got threatened. If you run for president, you have to put the country and the 330 million people that you're representing ahead of everything. So he
well,
was a bad figurehead to start with.
he ran, he pulled out, but then he re-entered the race. He re-entered the
Okay,
race.
I didn't remember that.
And yeah, and so he was on the ballot, and he was in the debates right before the elections, but the point I'm trying to make is that the Democrat Party. Here's some numbers that are that this is my concern. The Democrat Party, there's 7 to 8 million people who work for either a local, state, or the national government who are members of a government employee union. They pay an average of $900 a year in dues. That is $6 billion a year. 6 billion every year. 12 billion every 2 year congressional cycle. And you cannot be a Democrat in the House of Representatives unless the government employee unions support you. And because if you oppose the government employee union's agenda, they will beat you in the next Democrat primary. And so think about how much money and organization, because government employee unions have a huge, huge organization. They're at every local level, they're at every state level, and they're at the national level. And so the Democrat side of the political world is really run by they kowtow to the government employee unions, and I think that's a bad thing. I think it's a really bad thing for the country, but it exists. The Republican Party, the Republican Party has state parties, it has county parties, it has the national party, and Elon Musk thinks that he can create an organization to compete effectively with those two parties, and I don't believe that's possible.
Well, let me ask you this, because I mean, now I believe the movement, and if we can get the parties and the legislators and all that putting the Constitution as the moral compass, as the unbiased moral compass, then we can really get this reset that we need. And I believe we need a reset. But one of my biggest problems with the parties is it has, and I don't know when, maybe you can tell me with history, it at some point in history it stopped being about the people and it started being about the parties and their agendas. And it's infuriating to me because both sides have good ideas. It's infuriating when the Democrats or the Republicans won't pass something because election season's coming up, and this is what the American people need as a whole. But we're not going to pass it because it'll make the other party look good or it'll do this. And it's so much, like I said, it's about the party and not the people, and it's disgusting.
Well, the point that you make about supporting candidates who understand the Constitution and understand the how beneficial limited government is and individual liberty is, because that's what we get back to. Innovation is what drives prosperity, and
Mhm.
innovation is a function of individual liberty and not being told by the government what you can spend your time on and what you can't spend your time on. And so I would encourage Matt. I will say this: I have voted in every presidential election since 1972. I voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980 and 1984. In every other election until 2024, actually 2020, in every other election, I was choosing between somebody I thought was terrible and somebody I thought was not very good. And so I picked the one who was I thought not very good because I didn't think that Nixon. Well, Nixon was he was a globalist. I thought his foreign policy was interesting. Was I think the way he thought about foreign policy was interesting. He was not interested in economics at all. At one point, he was giving a speech and he was asked a question, and he said, "Well, we're all Keynesians now." And Nixon said that, and that's because Nixon didn't understand economics. Now, then Gerald Ford, he came along because he had been picked. He didn't understand economics, and he was also in a no-win situation because the last 2 years that he served, the Democrats had a veto-proof majority in the House and the Senate, and he had a little button. It was his win button, whip inflation now, which didn't work. And the Democrats, if the Democrats passed a piece of legislation, he vetoed it. They would override it 2 hours later. And then Reagan comes along, and I liked him, and I thought he was a very effective president, and I thought his values were good. His speeches were tremendous. I encourage every younger person who's not familiar with Reagan because they were alive at the time to go read his speeches or listen to them because they're quite good.
He was
Uh,
great.
then George Bush comes along, and I didn't think he was a good president. He didn't really care about economics. Bill Clinton, they claim, well, Bill Clinton balanced the budget. Well,
That
Newt
was the
Gingrich,
tech bubble.
well, not just that, but Newt Gingrich is the one that cut the taxes to expand the capital gains tax. I mean, to get the tax capital gains revenue. And so I think that Bill Clinton happened to be president when Newt Gingrich balanced the budget and he signed the legislation. But I don't want to get into whether or not Bill Clinton was a good or bad president because it's,
No, that's
uh,
fine.
you could, but then George W. Bush comes along, and after the war on terror started, his entire two terms was consumed by his idea of how to fight terrorism. And he wasn't a
Mm.
good president from the economy. And when he left office, we had what was called the Great Recession in 2009 and 10, and a lot of that was because of policies that took root during his administration. And then Barack Obama was, in my opinion, he'll go down from an economic standpoint and philosophical standpoint as a terrible president. But he did two things that are still with us today, and these get into these paradigms. And what Barack Obama did, one thing he did was he made student loans. He took it away from banks and made the federal government the lender of student
Mm.
loans. Well,
And
that means
that's driven up college prices.
driven the prices. It's double the price of tuition. When I went to Vanderbilt and graduated in '71, it cost $4,300 to attend Vanderbilt in 1971. And I don't know, we just got disconnected for a second, but he's driven, so it's driven up tuition, but also student debt is now in the trillions of dollars, and they're not paying it back. And so it's made education much more expensive, even though the value of the education or what you're getting from it has not gone up commensurate with the price. And then the other thing that he did was Obamacare, and the great promise that he made when he was, people talk about the promise that he made: if you want to keep your doctor, you can keep your doctor, or if you want to keep your insurance, you can keep your insurance. That's not the most important promise that he made that didn't happen. His promise was that if we pass Obamacare, it will reduce the cost of insurance by $2,500 a family per year. And what happened was 8 years later, it was $10,000 a year higher. Well, that is an enormous difference. And healthcare now for the average small business person who works for a small company or owns a small company, insurance is now the single biggest cost that they don't seem to have any control over. And so Obama made education way more expensive, but not better. And he made healthcare way more expensive, way more bureaucratic, and not better. So, if that was his goal to do those two things, then he was very successful. I don't think that was success.
Well, let me, I want to rewind it for a minute, and then we're going to fast forward it a little bit, and I want to talk about a statement that you made, and it kind of pertains to something that happened during George Bush's administration, and then I'm going to bring it up to something that actually happened last year, which is when the Republican Party actually lost me on April 12th of last year.
Okay.
Um, so and I'm not, like I said, this movement actually didn't start as a movement. It started as an unbiased conservative network, and it's just kind of evolved into what it is now, and it just keeps evolving. But something that happened, you said, when I was mentioning the Constitution, that we have to have lawmakers that are conscious, and that understand holding that as a moral compass. One thing that really happened that I thought was atrocious during George W. Bush was the pass of the Patriot Act, because that took away civil liberties. It took away, your right, Fourth Amendment right. It took away so much, and everybody's like, "Well, the ends justify the means, and you got to fight fire with fire." Well, no, because that makes us somebody we're not. We weren't
Right.
made, not to follow the Constitution, because that's what sets us apart, to me, from any other country in the world. So then you fast forward it, and you got Patriot Act 2.0, the FISA Act, and Mike Johnson, who is the Speaker of the House, he's actually our representative here in Louisiana. And so there was, I don't know if you remember back last April, it was 250 to 250. The FISA Act was never supposed to be used on U.S. citizens, but there was a loophole. And that was the big reason everybody's talking about January 6th and Donald Trump. Donald Trump was icing on the cake. The big reason in my mind was, let's change the biggest threat to America to domestic terrorism, which hadn't happened. But that allowed them to use the FISA Act to warrantlessly spy on patriots and American citizens. And then it was 250 to 250. It was up for renewal. And the they were they were they were tied because one faction wanted them to have to get warrants to abide by the Fourth Amendment, and the other faction didn't. And Mike Johnson was a tiebreaker, and he's a constitutional lawyer. He's one of the best in the area before he was in the House of Representatives. So he is a constitutional lawyer, and he goes in saying, "I'm going to vote to abide by the Constitution. I'm going to not fund Ukraine, whatever was part of the bill." And then the alphabet agencies, like we talked about, took him to a back room, had a conversation. He comes out and he does a 180. He votes to continue with warrantless spying. And when that happened, I said, you know what? I saw a good meme. And it was a meme of a vulture. It was actually recently where it had Epstein's head, and one wing said Democrat, and one wing said Republican. And it said a Republican Democrat are different wings on the same vulture. And that really kind of resonated with me because as we go back to talking about the parties and it not being about the people, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican. Everybody's got an agenda. And then he gives out this BS reason y'all don't see the big picture. There is no bigger picture than following the Constitution. And shame on you. You should know that, being a constitutional lawyer.
Well, everything you're saying is a great point, but and I'm not going to argue with it. I'm going to amplify what you're saying.
Okay.
Rahm Emanuel one time said, he made the comment. He said, never let a great crisis go to waste." And what he meant by that was every time something bad happens, that's an opportunity to increase the power of government. And that's what Rahm Emanuel wants government to become more powerful. Now he's trying to
Mhm.
run for president now, so he's trying to act like he's not a person, not who he is. And so everything you're saying about and you're right. I mean, what the Biden administration did was they named everybody that disagreed with him almost as a terrorist. They had the FBI investigating people who went to
Parents.
parents who went to school board meetings. They
Yeah.
had members who were Catholic and went to certain Catholic churches. They were
Hmm.
investigated, and so your point is a very very good one, and it's something that we should be pushing. You're not going to get the Democrat Party to to go for less power, except when Republicans have it, and because Democrats don't want Republicans to be able to claim certain Americans to be terrorists, and therefore Republicans can investigate them. so the so each party now is using it really to go as a cudgel to go after the other party when they have power. And so hopefully there's an opportunity in here where both parties say, okay, enough is enough.
Well, let me ask you a question. We talked about the independent party. You don't think it'll be a good day when an independent can actually challenge the other two parties and be elected? So I feel like the more choices we have as Americans, the better off we are.
Well, man, I'm going to push back on you a bit there,
Okay, do it, do it.
and I'm going to tell another story here
Okay.
to try to make my point. My wife and I were in Portugal last April, and we had a wonderful. We I didn't want to drive around in Portugal for fear of getting in a wreck. Having somebody drive me around Portugal turned out to be not that expensive, and so we hired a small company, and the owner of the small company, he had four cars, and he was one of his own drivers. And I think he happened to like my wife, and so he wanted to drive us around. And but he also was he was very well informed about Portuguese politics, and so I enjoyed talking politics with him. And I said, tell me how Portugal is organized politically and how it's governed. He said, well, we're a parliamentary system. He said we have five parties. He said the biggest party gets about 32% of the members of parliament. The second biggest party gets about 24%. He said, I'm a member of I like the third biggest party, which gets about 20%, and then the two smaller parties, they get the smallest. They get the smallest amount. And he said the biggest party is left of center. The second biggest party is far left. The three smaller parties are all for limited government, because we talked about we tried to define things so that when we would use the words, we would agree on what they meant. And he said, we want smaller government, but we don't make up 50%. And he said, the way our parliamentary system works is whichever party gets the most votes, most members of parliament, they have a period of time to form a government, a coalition government, and the center left party always sides with the far left party because it won't side with the center right party. And so what happens is after a year, the far left party gets frustrated because it can't get the center left party to do what it wants. So it drops out of the coalition and we have another election. He said, this is our third presidential election our third parliamentary election in 5 years. And so a multi-party system sounds good in theory,
Okay, but this. Go ahead.
but I'm not sure. So I want to get your ideas on how you think it would work in practice. So let's assume that there is a third party under our current system, because you can't, unless you go also argue to change the system, which
No,
we
no,
can.
no. No. But just like ours, people overcomplicate the movement. Well, where do you stand on this? Where do you stand? What's the Constitution say? And if it needs to be amended, okay. Well, as long as it's three quarters, I'm cool with that. You're
Okay.
overcomplicating. So what I think is what you described to me as apples and oranges, because we're talking about parliamentary, and we're talking about they don't have to do the jump through the hoops or the red tape, probably, or it's different red tape than what we do for a presidential candidate in the United States. And we're not going to have an election every couple of years. We're stuck with them for 4 years.
That's right. Now, so is the party the way you're describing the independent party? Is your goal is to have a viable presidential candidate who might win the presidency? Is that kind of
Yes,
the
and
goal?
give us an additional choice because, like you said, for the past how many years have you chosen between an awful candidate and a not so good candidate? So, giving us another choice and it actually being able to win, there being enough people that will vote or on an independent candidate that values both sides. Because
Okay.
my one of the reasons that I see that we have such a problem right now is we don't have Democrats like Joe Manchin, I think West Virginia. We don't have the centrist Democrats anymore. We have far left, far right, and then a few people that are right there on the line. These parties are. I mean, Joe Manchin was so frustrated with the Democratic Party when he left the Senate. He changed to being independent. He's not even a Democrat anymore. He didn't even vote Democrat. He's an independent. So we don't have, and in order to be able to debate and compromise, you have to have some kind of common ground. And these people are so far away from each other that nobody can cross the aisle because there's no common ground.
And I agree that there's no common ground. And what I'm suggesting, and I'm not focused right now in this discussion on what drives the Republican Party. We could have that
Yes.
discussion, and it would be an interesting one. For me, what drives the Democrat Party is the government employee unions control the Democrat Party because of the vast amount of money. If somebody says, I'm going to give $100 million to help the Democrats win the House seats next year, that's a large amount of money, isn't it? $100 million. The government employee unions spend $6 billion every year. $6 billion every year trying to make government bigger. And they're the ones who populate the school boards. They're the ones who populate the city councils in the large cities. In fact, even in Nashville, they control. I mean, Nashville's a great place to live, but Nashville is controlled and dominated by the politicians who are in office because they get the backing of the government employee unions. And so
And my go ahead.
you're not going to get a Democrat who is backed by the government employee unions to become a constitutionalist. You're just not going to get that. You're going to get people like Tim Kaine, who says, I don't even know why you think that anybody has any God-given rights. Every right you have is a privilege that's given to you by government, not by God. There's no such thing as a God-given right. Well, if you're a big wig in the government employee unions, you believe that the power emanates from government too, because that's how you're going to do better. That's how you're going to thrive. And so what I struggle with is, to me the two-party system is not is it. You can even argue it's bad. What I'm trying to understand is how a three-party system becomes better. Because let's say for purposes of discussion that, and I don't care which, but well, I do care for purposes of discussion. Let's say that the independent party wins 30 House seats, and let's say that because it wins 30 House seats, running on a strong platform of we respect and honor the Constitution, and so therefore it wins in some House districts that would have voted Republican, but now these are much stronger constitutionalists than the Republican who would have won is. But now the Democrats have the largest number of members of the House. So they name the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House now names all the committee members. Who will the members of the independent party, who will they side with?
I think when we look at it through that way, we're almost polarizing things too much. I don't think that we have to label ourselves like an independent candidate is just the best qualified candidate that doesn't agree with the directions of the two parties. But it doesn't have to be a party. He can still be a common sense conservative. He can still. There are a lot of Democrats that didn't like Kamala Harris. There are a lot of people that, if we had a good candidate that had that moral compass that said, I'm going to hold it up here. I mean, I understand what you're saying with the House, but my thing is like I said, if somebody goes in, it can be a Republican or Democrat, and they set that bar. I'd rather it be a Democrat, really, and they set that bar high. Then these parties that there are these people that these government employee they're getting $6 billion. These people that I mean, I feel like the big thing about the Democratic Party right now is they're too much about feelings and not about facts and rights. So if you have that one, we don't even have to have the. I mean, I think it would be a great day to have a third choice, and that third choice in the independent party can be a centrist Republican or a centrist Democrat if we have to put a label on them. I don't know why we got to label them, but if we got to label them, we can label them. But I just feel like whoever gets in there and sets that bar high, it's going to be real. It's going to be real far, and maybe the last time your party wins an election if you go in there and you try to get back down in the mud again and mudsling and erode our Constitution.
Well, listen, I am a huge fan, a great supporter in the Constitution. I'm an equally big supporter in the Declaration of Independence, because I believe that those set out the core values that define the American culture. And so you and I are I don't think we have hardly any separation on that. I am a great proponent of limited government. I live in Tennessee, and in Tennessee we have
I
no
used to live in North Carolina.
Okay, all right.
That's where I grew up.
We have no income tax. We have no tax on capital gains. We have no estate tax. We have no tax on interest and dividends. So if you live in Tennessee and you make money, the state, no matter how you make it, and in terms of whether it's a capital gain or dividends or earned, the state of Tennessee does not take a penny of it, not one penny.
Wow.
And we are the lowest indebted state in the country per capita, and so and we used to be run by the Democrat Party up until only about 15 years ago. We were run by the Democrat Party for decades, but our state constitution said that you could not have a state income tax, and our state constitution required a balanced budget. And so even the Democrats, as much as they wanted to spend more money, they couldn't. They were restricted by our Constitution. And so then what they did for 15 years, and I did talk radio during that entire time, for 15 years, they tried to argue that even though the Constitution of the state says there shall be no tax on income, that isn't really what it meant. And so they didn't want to try to amend the Constitution because that requires a vote of the people. And so what they tried to do is they tried to argue for 15 years that the clear language of the Constitution doesn't say what the clear language says. And they actually brought it to a House vote in 1999 to have a state income tax, and it failed. And our state is much better because it failed. And so for me, I'm a huge supporter of the Constitution. I'm a huge supporter of limited government. I think that especially at the national level,
I got a
so you
question
won't.
for you.
I can't hear you.
I didn't say anything. I didn't say. I was waiting.
Oh,
We went. Our tech went a little.
oh, okay. Well,
I don't
I
know
thought,
I don't know what's going on with with the tech. But hopefully, I think I have a platform, and it records you, and then it records me, and then it compresses it. So I think we'll be all right with the when it actually comes out when the show
okay.
is released. So but I do have a question for you, and it's going to bring us to a little bit more of it. We're going to kind of take a little bit of a turn out of history and theories, and go a little bit on something that I read about you, and get your take on something, and then I want to give you my take. So, with you being the CEO and board member, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, of Nashi
Na-
Biotech,
Nashai. That's part national.
Nashai, okay,
That's the
and
national. Nashai
okay, and
Biotech.
Shy Biotech. Okay, and specializing in developing and marketing tea flavin, a tea extract supplement aimed at reducing cholesterol, with operations extending to Shanghai, China. Being that a lot of tea comes from China, what do you think about the tariffs?
Well, we are subject to the tariffs, and we're having to work with our supplier because the vast majority of tea grown in the world is grown in China, and they have some very very good organic tea farms, and the extraction process that we have developed to extract this particular molecule from green tea. There's no other place in the world other than China that uses the extraction process so that we can create a raw material with a 22% concentration of theaflavin. And I think it's the theaflavin I've been taking for 25 years. I think it's the main reason that I don't take any prescription drugs, because it has. If you were to do a search on health benefits of theaflavin, that molecule, you'll find all kinds of health benefits, and those health benefits relate to the 1% concentration of theaflavin. Our product
Wow.
has a 22% concentration of theaflavin.
Okay, so let me see what you think about this, because see, I when he was campaigning and talking about tariffs, I've outlined what I think should happen, and it didn't happen when he came in on Liberation Day. And I actually took, just to get like just to get some feedback on what I consider probably the most comprehensive feedback I could get, I inputted my plan versus what he's doing to three different AIs.
Okay.
Copilot, Grok, and GTP, and they all said that mine was much more efficient and that it would stimulate growth in the U.S. economy immediately. So what I said from the get go was that he needed to use a scalpel, not a sickle. What he needed to do is immediately everything that we manufacture in the U.S. that we also import needs to have a tariff to even out those prices, so people would buy made in the U.S. and before the import, and it would stimulate the U.S. economy. But he didn't need to tariff things that we did not produce in the U.S. because that would raise it for the prices for American consumers. What he needed to do after that was go and all these allies that he has treated as adversaries, he needed to say, okay, you got two choices. You can join our coalition to bring China to kneel, the Western world against China instead of the U.S. against China, or the U.S. is going to tariff the heck out of you. And he would have, I really feel like that two-step would have really um, eliminated all these legal challenges, all these countries that are now going over to China because China is basically advertising itself as the stable partner, not the one that's going to continue to move the goalpost after I make a deal with you. I'm going to say 10%, and then I'm going to say 20% on Truth Social. So, my thing was, let's do this two-step. Let's stimulate the American economy. Let's bring China to kneel. What do you think about that?
Well, the question that you've asked is a very broad one, uh, and
Okay.
uh, and so I'm going to I'll try to uh, take the different pieces of it. And one is
Okay.
tariffs in general. One is tariffs in general. Tariffs are they the way Trump is using them is there are two ways he's using them. One is economic. One is foreign policy. I have, until Trump started using them for foreign policy, I never really thought about tariffs as a foreign policy tool, but he did, and it's kind of interesting. But he's using it for economics, where he's telling countries like Europe, which have a VAT tax, but anything that is exported, that they give you Europe, the government will give the VAT tax back to the manufacturer. And so that gives the manufacturers in Europe a tremendous advantage over U.S. manufacturers because they get a big tax rebate for exporting goods to the U.S. And so Trump has essentially said that's not fair. So I'm going to impose a tariff on you that is more or less equal to the VAT tax that you are giving back, unless you reduce the trade barriers for U.S. goods going into Europe. That's what he has done. Now, exactly how that's going to work out, time will tell. The most important thing I think Trump has done economically that'll be beneficial to the U.S. is in the big beautiful bill. For 4 years, any capital goods that are bought and installed in factories in the United States, any new capital goods, you can depreciate it 100% in the first year. Uh, that is a huge. That's why what I think you'll see is in 2026. Right now, what you're seeing is a lot of new factories. Land is being acquired, permits are being issued, but the construction of the new factories, I don't believe will take place until 2026. And so then you'll see a great deal of construction and for new factories. And then in 2027 and 2028, and maybe even the end of 26, you'll see a capital goods revival that will be like nothing we've ever seen. And so the capital goods, and by the way, the capital goods that are put in the factories will be the newest and best and most productive capital goods, most efficient capital goods in the world. So we will have the most modern and automated factories on the planet. So I think that's going to be very good. Now that's not tariffs. That's a public policy that's going to help drive the building of factories in the U.S. But getting
Okay.
back, but getting back to the tariffs, I think the foreign policy implications, and one thing, Matt, that and I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. But
Absolutely.
one thing as I look at history, Europe has a multi-hundred-year history of being really smart for short periods of time and mostly stupid for longer periods of time. And so that's why I said I don't remember where I saw the quote, but the quote was that America innovates, Asia imitates, and Europe regulates. Europe, if you look at the stock market for Europe over the past 20 years, it's not done well. And that's a leading indicator. That's an indicator of progress. Economic progress is your stock market. And it's not done well. The incomes of the average European have not done well for 20 years. And these are all of these problems that Europe is having economically are really a function of public policy, and a lot of it has to do with trying to protect certain industries, trying to regulate certain industries to the benefit of other industries, and and Trump is shaking all that up. He is because and I think that what you'll see, I think he'll actually help Europe shake off a lot of its big government policies because it won't be able to compete with Trump's America if it doesn't shake off a lot of the bureaucracy and regulations that it has.
Well, you keep mentioning Europe, and I've actually made 3 points I want to talk about. But you keep mentioning Europe, but Europe's to my understanding, I actually made a merchandise line on this because we have a store that we do try to do unbiased. When Trump does something good, we will make a merchandise line. You know, if he does something bad, obviously we'll make a merchandise line. But EU was Europe was the only one that he, in my mind, negotiated the favorable because a lot of goods now coming from Europe. Europe Europe pays the government, the U.S. government 15% on a lot. That's my understanding. Is Europe is actually the only one where the campaign promise the other countries are going to pay us tariffs has actually come to pass. Is that how you read it and understand it?
Well, there are certainly tariffs on goods coming from any countries in the EU. There certainly are that. There are tariffs on goods coming out of China, and there are other
No, but
countries
I'm
now.
saying doesn't
Please go.
in Europe the only nation that has actually negotiated its tariffs and is paying a 15% tariff to the U.S. on certain goods?
I don't know the answer to whether or not they're the only countries. I know that there's a lot of there's Trump will implement tariffs. He'll put in tariffs from time to time for foreign policy reasons. So, for example, he's trying to get Russia to come to the table and negotiate a peace settlement that with Ukraine that is satisfactory to both Russia and Ukraine. And my reading at this point is that Putin is not interested in giving up what will be required for him to give up. And so, what Trump is trying to do is get the European countries to essentially sanction Russia and to sanction China and to sanction India if necessary. When I say sanction, tariffs and things make life difficult would be that's what I'm going to put under the term sanction, and try to force Russia to agree to a settlement that ends the Ukrainian war. And I think that Trump will use tariffs to some extent as a foreign policy tool. That's not an economic tool; it's a foreign policy tool. And I don't know. I can't think of another way short of violence. I can't think of another way that an American administration, a more effective way to get countries to to yield to what you want them to do. And I think getting a peace in Ukraine is a worthy goal.
I mean, I do too. Obviously, I don't think from everything I've read that Putin's interested in it, but these tariffs are affecting small and mid-sized. They're affecting my businesses. I'm paying tariffs. I paid tariffs on a wedding dress, 25% tariffs. Car tires, $700 extra than the week before. But these tariffs are affecting the backbone of America. They are not affecting the Amazons and the Walmarts. Walmart is telling these mid-sized businesses and small businesses that sell to them, we're not going to even meet you in the middle and split the difference with you. You're going to sell it to us at the same cost. So it's affecting the backbone of America. And then I want to kind of rewind it to the big beautiful bill. You talked about depreciation. Well, if it's affecting small and mid-sized businesses, which I've read several instances and several different tests that these businesses have done on U.S. made goods to see if made in the U.S. sells better, even though it's more expensive. And this depreciation doesn't really help if you don't have the profit margins to buy new equipment.
Well, the benefit of the depreciation is really let's just use for an example, if you buy $1 million piece of equipment, you've got to fund that. And if you are a mid-sized company and you are profitable and you're paying, I think the corporate top, what is the top corporate tax rate? Is it about 35% on
Yeah,
earnings?
I think
I
that's
think it's
about
about,
35%. Yeah.
yeah. And so that means that if you spend $1 million, that and you're making say $1 million a year, then that $1 million of capital goods means that year you're going to make, for tax purposes, you're going to make nothing. And so that means that the government is essentially, for that one year, is essentially allowing you to not pay $350,000 in taxes, so that you can then put in that equipment, and you might not have been able to fund that new $1 million of equipment if you had been depreciating that
For
over a
seven
period
years.
of say 7 years. And so it will absolutely increase the amount of manufacturing capacity in the U.S. But I think Matt, the most important piece of it is that it will increase manufacturing with the most efficient capital goods in the world. So for a period of time, our factories will have the most efficient um, uh, capital equipment in the world because it'll be the newest. And I think that'll have an impact that has a tail of at least 5 years and probably 10. That'd be really good.
But I mean, I'm going to take it back for a minute. I still got an outline part, a part I want to take it back to on something else you said. But I'm going to take it back to a minute just to ask you a question on that. So, your America has always been about innovation. Well, not always. It really changed from manufacturing and innovation back in the 70s and 80s, to my understanding. So, I even if we have great equipment, we're still not bringing back textiles because we can't compete with 10 cents an hour.
No, there are certain products that will certainly be made overseas, but anything that requires a high level of sophistication, textiles is not one of them. Shoes is not one of them. A lot of things that require a certain amount of handwork will not be brought back into the U.S. If the consumer price for that product needs to remain low in order to be competitive and to be bought by a large number of people. And so I'm thinking more in terms of all kinds of sophisticated uh, capital things that we buy, or electronics, automobiles. I think even a lot of capital goods will start to be made here. I saw where Tim Cook says he's going to build a factory in the U.S. to make iPhones. I found that to be interesting because a few months ago he said that he couldn't build iPhones in the U.S. until the robotics existed to be able to do the little tiny things that need to be done on a,
Circuit
yeah,
boards.
board. Thank you very much. Um,
Um,
and you young
so
people, you
so
know all these
I'm gonna
terms.
I'm gonna I'm gonna bring it. I'm gonna take it back to something you said a minute ago, and something you're saying right here, and an underlying issue I see. and you tell me if you see it as an underlying issue. So a lot of times, like I said, we do reporting on political news, world news, every news, financial news, tech news, and all that. And a lot of times, I'll find read the writing on the wall or read in between the lines on different kinds of news, like financial news and tech news. So a lot of companies now are laying off people to replace them with AI, this expensive equipment you're talking about, this manufacturing equipment, this expensive equipment. So if they're getting breaks to put in equipment so they can then save money on manufacturing costs, but they're putting people out of work, does it really do anything that we're going to be opening up more plants that are going to have less people working at them? And until we were literally rewarding people to lay people off and incurring $3 trillion plus in debt to do it.
Well, the the argument that you're making is one that is really a very important discussion for where we are today. A lot of the manufacturing, I think you and I will agree, a lot of the manufacturing that Trump is trying to get in the United States is coming back from abroad, and so it'll be manufacturing that's made here. So it's not really laying off people who are Americans. It will be unemploying people who work in the factories abroad that are now being brought back, and so the manufacturing will be done here for some of that. Now, there's one thing, and you probably have seen this, but are you familiar with the term dark warehouses?
No.
Look it up. You'll be fascinated. These are warehouses that are completely the movement of the goods within the warehouse is completely automated. The warehouses do not need lights. They don't even need energy to heat and cool the warehouses, as long as the products in the warehouses can exist in the whatever the temperature is. And everything in the warehouses, all the goods are moved by robot. They're moved in by robot. They're moved out by robot. And so you have, instead of having 50 to 100 people running a distribution center, you'll have maybe 5 people operating the consoles. And so, and this kind of gets back to, well, what are we going to do with all the workers who are now going to be laid off? And my answer to that is, I can't tell you what new products and services will be demanded by the public. As long as our economy is growing, I don't know what new goods and services they'll be demanding. And so, whatever those goods and services are, this is where people who are laid off will migrate toward those goods and services. Now, this is just it's just kind of back in the old days, there was a term called the Luddites, and this was back when factories came into being in Great Britain to make cloth. Instead of doing it by hand and making socks by hand, you had these big weaves that would make the cloth by machines. And the Luddites thought that this would do away with the jobs of the people who knew how to make cloth by hand, and it did do away with their jobs. But because the cloth made by machines was so much less expensive because it was so much more efficient to make the cloth by weaves, the market became much bigger because the price was so much lower. And so the people who did make the weaved products by hand now operated the machines, and there were many more machines, and then the consumers bought many of them. So now retail stores open. So the way a free market works is that, yes, there is dynamic destruction. That's one thing that Schumpeter talked about, was that innovation would destroy some ways of doing things. But when it destroys some way of doing things, it is always inherently more efficient. Whatever is destroyed is replaced by something that is inherently more efficient, and that then drives a demand for goods and services that have not yet ever existed. And so the key thing to me is that we keep our regulations as low as possible.
Mm-hmm.
We keep our taxes. It's interesting. Tariffs. The a lot of the news people on what I call the left leaning news media, they
Mhm.
call it, they will question the Trump administration officials, and they say, don't you agree that tariffs are a form of tax? And if I were answering that question, I would say, well, I'll answer that question if you'll answer a question for me, and that is, are taxes good or bad? And because it
Food
seems to
for
me,
thought.
well, it seems to me that the people who are asking if tariffs are a tax are the same people who bemoan when taxes are cut. Who
Hypocrites.
Yeah, and so I call a tariff primarily a voluntary tax at the end of the day, because if a tariffed good is if the price goes up too much, the consumer can choose not to buy it if they choose
Uh,
not to. Go ahead.
okay,
Go ahead.
well. My whole thing on that, the voluntary thing, is the fact that they did away with the $800 where you could import stuff in, which helped a lot of businesses. But it also, they did away with the 800. You can't import anything of any value in without paying a tariff or a flat rate on it now. That expired like a week or so ago. So
Oh,
my whole thing is you can literally have family in another country that's sending you a birthday or Christmas present, and you have to pay to get your own present in the country. So that's not voluntary.
no, that's not. No, that's not. And I was, and tariffs are you can look at if taxes are necessary, and I'm not saying they are or aren't. I'm saying if taxes are necessary, then you can either have taxes applied directly or you can have taxes applied indirectly. A tariff is more or less an indirect tax, and so the if you're and the tariffs I understand are going to bring in about $300 billion in revenue to the government.
Which
So
is coming from the American people, most
which
of it, except for some of the EU.
yeah, I'm not. What I'm saying is that if you raised taxes 300 billion on the American people, 100% of the money would be coming from the American people. 100% of that $300 billion taxes would come from the American people. If you impose a tariff of 300 billion, then maybe some of the factories abroad choose to eat some of that tariff rather than raise their prices. I don't know. I'm saying that what's also going to be interesting is the amount of the increase in the federal debt since Trump has taken office. The rate of increase has dramatically gone down. It's still going up. The debt is still going up, but the rate of the increase is not going up at nearly the rate that it did under Biden. Under Biden, the rate of increase was going up at about $200 billion a month. Under Trump, it's going up at about $100 billion a month. That's a substantial difference in the rate of the increase of debt.
Is that including the big beautiful bill, the 3.4 trillion or whatever of the big beautiful bill?
Well, it is including what I did was I go back and I look at I look at the amount of federal debt on January 20th of 2024. I look at that and I look at the amount of debt on January 20th of 2025. The amount of debt went up $2.4 trillion. 2.4 trillion. Then I look at the amount of the increase in debt in the 8 months that Trump has been in office. It's gone up 900 billion. So it's gone
Yeah,
up a little over.
I don't think the big beautiful bill. It's not. It's there. Those expenses haven't been added yet. It's too new.
Well, remember, yeah, but the debt, the increase in the debt is a factor of a lot of different things
Oh
besides
yeah.
just revenue. And so I will be watching. I'm going to predict, Matt, for you, and you can write this down, and then I will erase it if I'm wrong. But I will predict that in the fiscal year that begins October 1st, which is coming up, I'll
Okay.
predict I'll predict that the debt increases in that next 12 months less than $1 trillion. which is back down to about 3% of the economy. I still would like it to be somewhat lower,
Hmm.
but if I also believe that that real wages will grow by 5% in that same 12-month period. Real wages will grow by 5% because
I'm
I
gonna
think
message you if it doesn't.
you put that down because I am a big believer in Trump is cutting regulations dramatically, and regulations have a double cost. Regulations are expensive for the government to to do, and then
Yeah,
somebody in the private sector is having to comply with them. And
kind of
so
like
if
the
you
insurance, the companies that had to do so much more to get the paid by the insurance, so
yes,
it cost them a lot more money. Same thing.
same principle. And at the end of the day, Matt, most the when you boil economics down, you've heard we've all heard the expression time is money. We've all heard that expression. But money, whatever amount of money we're talking about, is a precise amount. There is no way to say how much the value of time, a particular unit of time is, because you don't know what innovation somebody might come up with in that period of time that multiplies the value of time. And so when I look at the policies that are going to affect the foreseeable future, I am extremely bullish on the U.S. economy over the next 5 years, because I think that the policies that are in place, that are now in place, are very good ones, and I think that any new policies, I'm going to be very interested to see what the federal budget that passes is, where it begins in a little over 3 weeks. In 3 weeks' time, we have the new budget. That'll be very interesting to see if more government expenses. Because remember, when Trump came into office, he gave hundreds of thousands of federal employees an opportunity to take a buyout. You remember that?
I do.
Yeah,
He's also paying people to go across the border $1,000 if you leave
yeah,
voluntarily.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But the people who took the buyout, they are still being paid. All of that runs out at the latest. All of that runs out by the end of December. All of that runs out by the end of December. So the amount of government spending, because I think it's like 300,000 federal employees are now not going to be on the. There'll be 300,000 fewer federal employees being paid, and that's a lot of money.
Yeah, yes, it is, and I want to rewind this just for a second because you really said a lot, but I want to reiterate something that I've said before on time. The thing with time with me, and I really started to realize this the more successful and the older I got, is that time is your most valuable asset because it doesn't matter if you're Elon Musk, it doesn't matter who you are, you cannot buy more than 24 hours in a day.
Yes.
So it is your most valuable asset. And like I
Hmm.
said, the older I got, the more money I made, the more I realized that. Um, on the tariffs, that's just something that I guess we're gonna have to see because I took economics in college as an elective with political science as an elective. My education is in exercise science and a certified nutritionist, but I did take those, and you're split down the middle with economists, and like you said, you got three different perspectives on what was going to happen. Basically them predicting the future. You have three different economists, three different ones. So we're just going to have to see. It's too new. We're going to have to see with tariffs. But I think we can both agree that if we don't learn from the past, that we are doomed to repeat it.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Matt, I have to tell you, I'm
No,
embarrassed by this, but I don't have to go, but my low battery is popping up on my computer, and
maybe that's what's been going on with our connection.
well, I'll make
No, that's
well,
cool. If you'll just hang around in the studio, give me 30 seconds to wrap this up. Hang around the studio so we can just talk for a sec or two before you go,
sure,
and I'll wrap it up. Is that fine with you?
yeah, yeah, that's great, that's
Okay.
great. Well, while I'm hanging around, I'm going to run downstairs so that I can plug my computer in. So I'm going to just
Absolutely.
you'll see a moving background. I just
A
want you to know
flash.
that. Okay.
All right. Well, let's all thank Crom Carmichael for joining the Patriot Party. And to all of you out there, stay safe. And don't forget to catch our Saturday morning show at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, where truth meets every corner of the news.